years, we at Envia have been really interested in the rites of passage that accompany us in life. And over the past few years, we have become especially intrigued by the phase constituting eldership or sagehood, because we have quite a lot of community members who are now entering this phase. So we would like to have a conversation with our broader community about what it means to age positively in a society and a culture that places so much emphasis on youthfulness, immortality, and the pursuit of pleasure. We would like to have a conversation with older people about their perspectives on the meaning of life.
A lifetime of attempting to trust God in all things. Injustice is injustice. I became fiercely desiring independence and freedom and to make up my own mind about my own life. Yes, I am diminishing. I'm diminishing intellectually, physically, in every sense. Self-discovery is for me the true way to go.
Her titles are many: academic, scholar, author, feminist theologian. I found Denise Ackermann to be all of these things, but also wife, mother, and grandmother.
Hi Denise, and
Hi.
thank you very much for talking to me this morning. How would you introduce yourself to me? Who is Denise Ackermann?
Denise Ackermann. Okay. An about to be 87-year-old with a life that encompasses a huge amount of gratitude, singularity, of course, and I would say somebody who still enjoys some things and who is limited by others because of age and because of the things that happen to you when you get older. But I think I'm probably I've all my life probably been more of a doer. I'm probably given more to doing and being, for instance, if there's injustice, being angry than there is about getting depressed, which is very fortunate when you get to my age because you don't want to be depressed. I am surrounded by many elderly people here who are not well in that sense. So I'm very grateful for that. So I think by and large you're looking at somebody who has had a long, fruitful and not uninteresting life and who is chugging along in what I realize is probably a short time left. Yeah.
How does 86, almost 87 feel?
At times, extraordinarily ancient. At other times, I really... You'll see, if you get there one day, it's very limiting on many things. As a person who's prized her independence all her life, and I have lived a pretty independent life, given that I'm a mother and a wife, I have largely lost that. I have to rely on others. My eyesight is going fast. I have to rely on others to see for me. I can't drive cars anymore. I can't do many of the things I would want to do. So it's limiting. And you have to learn to live with the limitations. And I guess you just don't look too far ahead. You try and live day by day.
And when you speak of limitations, obviously what I hear also is loss of many things. And you mentioned to me that I think 2005 was a significant year in your life.
Yes, it was a significant year in my life. I had, I don't know where to start, right. I had to go to hospital and I was diagnosed with breast cancer. In virtually the same time as I was told that I'm going to lose my sight. So these were two issues I had to deal with then. The breast cancer, in a way, was much easier to deal with. The loss of sight, I was extraordinarily angry with God about to start with, and quite devastated. I had booked a trip, a retreat for that year. I was going to go for the 30-day retreat to St. Byners in North Wales. I had my surgery in April. I did not delay going to the Galapagos in May on the trip of a lifetime. Then when I came back and and then they wanted to start treatment on me, I said, no treatment now. I'm going on this retreat to Wales. And I went there as a very angry person when I started off. Fortunately, the person who was directing me through the retreat was a wise and witty Irish nun, and she summed me up right from the beginning. And all that I can tell you is after my 30 or 35 days there, when I left, I was no longer angry. And my life changed a lot.
How do you deal with that? How do you integrate loss, pain, and suffering into your life?
We all have loss, pain, and suffering. There is no faith in Jesus Christ without suffering. We all have our Gethsemanes. How we deal with them, I guess, is deeply laid down in who we are, in the nature of our relationship with God. And if your relationship with God is one of a lifetime of attempting to trust God in all things, because that is what I believe, then it's tough. Then you have to often say, your will and not mine. I had to go and have an eye checkup yesterday, and the verdict is pretty, there's no hope for my eyes. And so that impacts on not only on my everyday relationships and what I can do and whether I can still cook and see what I'm doing or pour the coffee for you, but on my ability to read. And then I can be very grateful. I have very good hearing. And so I'm now discovering I can listen more than I ever listened before, which is nice. And I get, the carer reads to me when I need it, and so on and so on. So you make a plan, you cope. And I've got very little to moan about, because I think basically I have probably inherited quite a strong. My father died at 90, or my mother died at 83. But I think one's lifestyle has a lot to do with it. And I think, fortunately, looking back, I'm told by the doctors, the fact that I used to climb the mountain every week and was physically active, and the fact that I eat very simply and very healthily has stood me in good stead.
Wow.
So if I can give any advice to a young person, keep exercising and eat healthily.
Wow. I remember when I met you at the retreat a couple of years ago, you mentioned that when you were a little girl, your parents really moved around a lot, and that deeply impacted your personality. And then you also mentioned a fractured life.
Yes, a fractured childhood, really, more than anything. I was in Standard 4 at Grootskie Law School down the road from where I lived in Claremont, when my father one day called me into his study and he said, in a month's time you're going to school in Sweden. I said, Sweden? Where's that? Well, that turned out to be true. I did have to go to school in Sweden because in 1945 the then Prime Minister was Jannie Smuts, and Jannie Smuts asked my father to start the first diplomatic mission in Sweden. And so my father accepted the job, and off we went to live in Sweden. And there were no English schools or international schools. I had to stand in the playground watching the kids play. I couldn't speak a word of Swedish. And I had to buckle down and do Standard 4 and Standard 5, and then into Standard 6. And then my father said to me, and now you and Mom and your brother must go and get some sunshine. I'm sending you back to South Africa. So I had just settled there when back I came. Where did I go to school then? In Piet Retief. I don't know if you know where that is, on the borders of what used to be called Swaziland. And I went to an Afrikaans primary school there for a term, and then my mother came to Cape Town, and then I went to Jan van Riebeeck for 6 months. And then my father said to me, and now we're going to go and live in Buenos Aires. And so I had to then go to a school there, which was, you must stop me if I'm saying too much, but there was a large English-speaking community in the Argentine. They were imported to set up the railways and the electrical grid. So they had very good schools. I went to an excellent school, but it was in the time of Juan and Eva Perón. And the law was made, if you go to school in English in the morning, then you have to do your whole curriculum over again in the afternoon. So I had to do matric in English and in Spanish. And then worse was to follow when I was in what was then Standard 8. My father again came with the next lot of news. He said, next year, I've got to go back to South Africa. You can choose to do matric at a new school in South Africa, or you can do your last 2 years in one here in Buenos Aires. So I chose that because I couldn't face another new school. So I did Standard 9 and Standard 10, which was then the thing, in 1 year, and wrote matric at 15, and then left. And then my father and mother came back to South Africa on a long leave. And in July, they dumped me at a courses at Stellenbosch University and said, bye-bye, we're going to live in Portugal. And I just had to get on with life. So what did it teach me? Well, it taught me something about surviving. So I developed very strong survival instincts, which, by the way, afterwards, I had to unlearn a lot of, because that did not par with my spirituality, as you can understand, my faith as it developed. Yeah.
I'm just mesmerized by what I've heard now. How did that, sure, it taught you survival skills, but Denise, how did that influence your personality, your being? This, moving, just this whole disruptive childhood.
I think for both, there was, like all things, there was a good side to it and a not good side to it. I think the not good side to it was that I became fiercely desiring independence and freedom and to make up my own mind about my own life and to survive and all that sort of stuff, which drove out other stuff that was probably just as important. But on the other hand, it also gave me skills that I probably would not have had otherwise. And one of the offshoots of it, there's a myth. Well, I don't think it's a myth, actually, because I have friends here who win the same thing, that the children of diplomats, when they grow up, either hate traveling or they can't stop. Now, my brother's not a traveler. I couldn't stop. I just went on traveling for the rest of my life. But I think the good things that it taught me was about people, about how different we are and how the same we are. And whether I was in Sweden or whether I was in Buenos Aires, or whether I had to survive in Portugal afterwards for a bit and so on, they were all very different cultures with different histories and so on, but people are people. And I think it helped for me that I have never been overwhelmed by, I don't see people as having all these barriers between us necessarily, because for me, people are people. And that was a good thing. I mean, I had to learn to deal with so many different kinds of people.
Your background indicates a very strong political awareness. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, I told you my background was I grew up with an Afrikaans-speaking father and English-speaking mother. My mother came from the United Party background. My father never joined the Broederbond or anything like that, but my father I would describe as a conservative Afrikaner. And I didn't have, I grew up, my early years were during the war years, of course. And in my home, there was contention about the war at times. My mother's family were up north fighting against the Germans in the North African deserts. My father's family was sitting happily on their farms down here. And so I grew up with a sort of feeling that people's ideas of what were right and what were wrong differed from my very early childhood, and I had to start figuring out. So may I describe it in 3 phases?
Please do.
The first part of my awareness was my awareness of privilege. And that happened to me when I was 12. I was in Hamburg in Germany, staying with my American godfather. Now, this was just after the war. It was I'm telling a fib, I was 11. It was in 1946. I was staying with him just after the war. Everything was bombed out. My mother had forbidden me to go outside. So one day I snuck out and I went for a walk, and there were just piles and piles and piles of rubble everywhere. And out of this rubble crept a child in a long raincoat. And this child just stood and looked at me. And I had a banana in my pocket and I gave it to the child. He put it in his mouth, skin and all. And I ran home angry and crying, realizing something about my privilege vis-a-vis his. So that was stage number 1. I think stage number 2 was probably in 1956. I was working in Stellenbosch at the time, and there was a meeting in the town hall. And this meeting was about the removal of the colored people from the voters' roll. And there were speeches given about it, and I remember one of them was Sans Pieter Blanche. And they were describing, how the colored should go off the voters' roll, etc., etc. I didn't really understand much of it all, not having really grown up in South Africa for that length of time, but it felt unjust to me. So I stood up and I said, but that can't be right. That is not just. You can't take the vote away from people. And then I sat down. And that night, somebody threw a brick through the window of my flat in Nassauhuis. That, I think, was the beginning of my political awareness, which stayed with me. Because then I began to open my eyes to what was happening in my country, which I'd been shielded from having grown up in my formative years abroad. So I would think that that was the beginning of that. It was a question of privilege, and it was a question of race. And then, at the same time, and quite soon after that, was coupled my awareness of the injustices towards women. And that's how I eventually, when I became a theologian, I took up the cause of women in theology and women in the broader Christian church. Yeah.
Because I read somewhere that you are called a feminist theologian. Please tell me what that is.
Well, you see, today I hear, it's so funny when I listen to the younger feminists and so on, and I think, julle weet niks. Sorry, I mean, you don't know what it was like. It means that what I did was, I began in terms of my theology and my belief systems to investigate why it is that women in the Christian church are second-class citizens. And we have a long history of that. The churches are patriarchal, they're run by men. The dogmas and things, the belief systems are concocted by men. The Bible is translated, I'm pretty sure, until recently by men. And there's a lot of stuff I could talk about that. But as my awareness grew, and so when I first went to study theology, I decided to do my master's on the question of women's ordination, not because I wanted to be ordained, and I never have had the calling to that, but because I did believe that God gave every single human being gifts, and that our gifts are to be used in service of the church, and that women that wanted to serve the church in the ordained ministry were being denied it, and that simply didn't make sense to me. And so that's, I guess, how I got into theology early on, as a feminist theologian, yes. Okay. But that meant I also argued the cause, injustice is injustice. And whether it is towards women, whether it is towards gay people, whether it's towards people with infirmities or whatever, all those things. Every human being has dignity. And I have all my life believed in that. But of course that made the race policies in my country so stark. I could not believe once my eyes were opened about what was being done to black people. It was extraordinary.
Earlier, Denise said she didn't see people as having all these barriers between them. That reminded me of the retreat where I met her a couple of years ago. I remember at the retreat, when you spoke about your diminishing eyesight and about this, your childhood, I remember sitting there looking at you and thinking to myself, I was struck by your willingness to show your vulnerability around this. And I thought, I wonder, that openness which I experienced from you that day or about you, were you always like that, or is that something that has come, that has developed over the years?
I think I've always been outspoken, yes. But I think it's probably also come over time, more and more and more. It's become, I really feel, and it's not that I haven't had to confess. It's not that I haven't done things that I am ashamed of. Not at all. But I think when one gets older, you either retreat into utter closedness and so on, and over vulnerability, or else I'm inclined with my temperament to really probably just say it as it is. And yes, I am diminishing. I'm diminishing intellectually, physically, in every sense. But that's what happens when you grow old. So, and it happens in different ways to different people, of course. In that sense, we are different. I mean, I have friends who are older than I am and who are much sharper than I am.
On that note, being the age you are, is there anything that you'd like to say to the younger generation? And that younger generation can be Carmen, sitting over there, who's in her 20s, or it can even be me, who's 60. Anything you'd like to share? Any advice?
I think be true to your own self. Be who God has made you to be. Don't try to be like anybody else. Find your own self, your own truth, and follow that. And that's partly a faith statement, but it comes out of my life experience. And that journey of finding out who I am, and I'm sure you are, knowing what you've told me, you're finding things about yourself that you didn't know before. So it's this eternal journey of self-discovery. But we'll only embark on that if we're open to it. If we don't have set ideas of this is how it's got to be and this is who I am, I think there's a true self that will surprise all of us. And if I can put it in faith language, that true self is the Denise that God created me to be in the image of God. And each one of us is unique, and each one of us reflects something of that image, and that is what we need to try to live. That's the true self. It's a process, it's a journey, whatever word you want to use, but it is something that is the fundamental truth to living a fulfilled life, to be who God made you to be. And not the injured Denise, not the one with the patriarchal father, not the one that was chucked around from pillar to post and had to just learn to be a survivalist. That's short-term stuff. But one has to find out, who am I really? And where's the narcissism, the hurt from childhood, you know, which makes us narcissistic and so on. To deal with that, to deal with my own selfish desires. It's a long, long journey, and it's not an easy one. But self-discovery is, for me, the true way to go. Particularly as I was a Simon and Garfunkel fan. If you have your hand in the hand with the man from Galilee.
That's a beautiful phrase. Yes.
Yeah, oh, I love their music.
You have your hand
in the hand of the man from Galilee. Yeah.
Yeah. But Denise, that process of self-discovery, that journey, I'm right in the middle of it.
No, I could hear that.
Wonderful. You know, I sometimes say to myself, how is it that one can be more of who you are? But that's what I'm experiencing.
Yes, well, you mentioned that, and that's a nice phrase, because that really means you're becoming who you really are.
We hope you enjoyed episode 1. Should you wish to further reflect on this interview, you can download notes from our website, www.envia.org.za. Episode 2 is also now available on YouTube.